For my critical essay, I decided to discuss David Walker's appeal and how his life and environment has changed to what my life and environment is today. I kind of found myself struggling when I was trying to get my thesis together because I felt like the changes that I really highlighted were pretty obvious. You know, when David Walker was writing his appeal, Black people were slaves, we didn't have constitutional rights, things of that nature, and of course we're not slaves anymore, we do have constitutional rights. So those kinds of things were pretty obvious to me, and I wanted to have a more critical analysis of these changes as opposed to them just being superficial. And with that, I was able to realize that the superficial changes that we have today have essentially created a more unpronounced racism and a more unpronounced oppression that we face today. Specifically talking about generational racism and how that has transformed the blatant racism that used to occur to the unpronounced racism, like I said, that we have today. Socially, it's no longer acceptable to be discriminatory to someone based off the color of their skin. And so because white people don't want to risk tarnishing their reputation and their perception by other white people in society, they have to still implement those oppressions, but take a different avenue in order to adequately project them on us. And so I spoke about allochronic discourse in my paper because I felt that allochronic meaning happening at different geological times, that kind of relates to generational racism, which is also what David Walker kind of highlights at the end of his appeal on page 171, where he says, whether they are as good by nature as we are or not, their actions since they were known as a people have been the reverse. He finishes that by saying, we cannot exactly tell, but it will be proven in succeeding generations. And so I felt like he was kind of saying that, you know, from what we've seen from white people so far, they're not good people. They don't care about Black people. They don't care about us. They don't want us to have these things. And whether we know that right now or not, it will be proven in future generations based on how Black people are treated, you know, hundreds of years from now. Which brings us to today. In 1850, when we were slaves and David Walker wrote this, of course we're not slaves anymore, but there are different attempts at keeping Black people from having certain freedoms and opportunities that aren't as blatant as what they were back then. For example, when I'm talking about allochronic discourse, the actual article that I learned about allochronic discourse was discussing a school that was caught giving their students dated material, even though they had received a federal grant to buy and offer new materials like computers, printers, books, you know, pencils, things of that nature. They had a federal grant to get those new things, but they never gave them to the students. They actually didn't even use the grant because the predominantly white staff that was there, like they discussed in here, generationally felt that these Black kids didn't deserve these new materials. And so white people are strategically positioning themselves in positions of power in different work environments to where they are able to manipulate and control the things that Black people are given access to, i.e. materials. Or if a white person becomes a judge and he can give a Black man 20 years for possession of a firearm or life in prison for possession of marijuana, they can take away our freedom just like that. And if it is a white person who believes that Black people don't deserve freedom and they're a judge, they have the power to do that. And we can't argue it because you had a gun or you had weed or whatever the case may be. But those are also the same judges that are giving white boys 6 months in jail for raping an unconscious girl in the bushes, or doing a mass murder in a school. So that kind of underlying things that occur today are drastically different from how David Walker lived, because a lot of the things that he discussed were, you know, blatant things that they were experiencing. In the very beginning of his appeal, he talks about colored people being the most degraded, wretched, and abject set of beings that ever lived since the world began. And when I read that, I felt like I still believe that some white people feel that way. So what's the difference between now and then? Now, they can't blatantly treat us like the most degraded, wretched, and abject set of human beings. They have to take calculated pathways to be able to tarnish the opportunities and things that we get. He also talks about their greatest earthly desires are to keep us in abject ignorance and wretchedness. And a school teacher, principal, not utilizing a grant that they got to give black children new materials. Is it blatant? No. And would people have found out had whoever figured it out not made it a public article? Probably not. And so the ways that they are implementing these still generational racist hatred feelings have to be taken at a far different way in order to keep from their public reputation being tarnished. White people don't ever want to be associated with being racist. If you accuse a white person of being racist, they get very defensive. They don't want, they swear that they're not racist. They don't want to be known as a racist. They don't want to associate with racists, because we have evolved as a society to be far more inclusive. We see things every day about being more inclusive in all avenues of life, whether it's, race, age, religion, things of that nature. There's a lot more inclusivity today, and I applaud that, and I recognize that change. But I also recognize that we are still mistreated and we are still oppressed. And how can that be if we have all these changes? Because the methods that they're using to oppress us have to be discreet. They have to be secretive. They have to be taken in a way that if you aren't really paying attention, you might not really recognize that there are more black men that are either on parole or in prison than there were slaves in 1850. And so those types of things are happening to where, they want for us to just be appreciative that we have freedom. They superficially say, you guys aren't slaves anymore, you have constitutional rights, and we recognize that, and that kind of distracts people from recognizing the change and the underlying oppressions that we still face today. So that's what I had my paper about and my argument about change of my time in David Walker's.